I just got off the train. Where am I supposed to go now? My mother-in-law asked, tears in her eyes. Rachel's phone buzzed with an unknown Chicago number just as she was settling into her evening routine. The voice on the other end was Linda's, but stripped of its usual authoritative tone, replaced by something Rachel had never heard before, genuine desperation. I just got off the train, Linda said, her words catching between shallow breaths. Where am I supposed to go now? The question hit Rachel like cold water. 3 days earlier, she'd finally reached her breaking point with Linda's constant criticism and manipulation, telling her mother-in-law that she was no longer welcome in their suburban home. David had been in Seattle on business, leaving Rachel to handle months of accumulated resentment alone. The confrontation had been brutal and necessary, ending with Linda declaring she'd rather live on the streets than apologize for speaking her mind. Rachel had assumed it was another dramatic gesture, the kind Linda specialized in when she wanted to guilt her family into submission. But the voice on the phone carried none of Linda's usual theatrical flair, just raw confusion and fear. You said you had friends in Milwaukee, Rachel managed, her own voice sounding steadier than she felt. They're not, it didn't work out. Linda's admission came with a vulnerability that made Rachel's chest tighten with unexpected sympathy. I bought a ticket back to Chicago because I hoped. The sentence hung unfinished between them, loaded with implications neither woman wanted to address directly. Linda had burned her bridge with her son's wife, gambled on finding refuge elsewhere, and lost. Now she was calling the person she'd spent 2 years trying to undermine, asking for mercy she'd never shown in return. Rachel could hear the ambient noise of Union Station through the phone, announcements echoing off high ceilings, the rumble of departing trains, the constant movement of travelers who all knew where they were going. Rachel's mind raced through possibilities, each one carrying consequences she wasn't prepared to face. Linda's tears were audible now, small gasping sounds that felt like manipulation even if they might be genuine. 2 years of psychological warfare had taught Rachel to question every emotion her mother-in-law displayed. But something about Linda's voice, the absence of her usual calculated drama, suggested this desperation was real. Rachel found herself remembering David's stories about his mother's childhood, the series of foster homes and unstable relationships that had shaped Linda's need to control every situation. For the first time, Rachel wondered if Linda's cruelty came from a place of genuine terror about being abandoned. There's a hotel near the station, Rachel said finally, hating herself for the words even as she spoke them. The Palmer House. I can pay for 1 night while we figure this out. Linda's relief was immediate and overwhelming. Rachel, 1 night, Rachel interrupted, her voice hardening. And we're going to have a conversation tomorrow, a real one. After hanging up, Rachel sat in her living room, staring at the space where Linda's presence had dominated every family gathering for 2 years. The woman had criticized Rachel's cooking, questioned her career choices, and suggested repeatedly that David deserved someone more traditional. She'd made Rachel feel inadequate in her own home, turning every visit into a battlefield where Rachel inevitably lost. Now Linda was alone at a train station, probably counting the money in her purse and wondering how she'd miscalculated so badly. Rachel felt no satisfaction in her mother-in-law's predicament, only a weary recognition that family relationships were more complicated than simple justice would allow. When David called from Seattle an hour later, Rachel had to decide how much to tell him about his mother's situation and her own choice to help. The next morning, Rachel found Linda in the Palmer House lobby, looking smaller than she'd ever appeared in Rachel's home. The expensive clothes and carefully maintained appearance that had always armored Linda's authority were wrinkled and diminished, revealing a woman who'd spent the night confronting her own limitations. Linda's apology, when it came, was halting and imperfect. She admitted to feeling threatened by Rachel's independence, acknowledging that her criticism had been rooted in fear that her son would choose his wife over his mother. The confession was painful to hear, partially because it revealed how much damage Linda's insecurity had inflicted on their family. Rachel listened without forgiveness, but also without the anger that had sustained her through 2 years of conflict. She saw Linda clearly for the first time, not as an evil force deliberately trying to destroy her marriage, but as a damaged woman whose survival strategies had become weapons against the people she claimed to love. The conversation that followed established new boundaries with surgical precision. Linda could visit, but not stay overnight. She could offer opinions, but not ultimatums. She could express concern for David, but not criticize Rachel's role in his life. Most importantly, any violation of these rules would result in immediate and permanent removal from their lives. Linda agreed to everything with the desperation of someone who finally understood how close she'd come to losing her son entirely. She would return to her Milwaukee friends, who, as it turned out, had simply grown tired of her constant complaints about Rachel, but with a new understanding of what relationships required. David's reaction, when Rachel finally told him the full story, surprised her. He thanked his wife for showing his mother more mercy than she'd shown Rachel, but also supported every boundary Rachel had established. He'd been protecting his mother from consequences for years, and Rachel's intervention had finally forced Linda to confront the reality of her behavior. 6 months later, Linda's visits were shorter, quieter, and focused on building relationships rather than controlling them. The train station incident had taught both women that family bonds, however strained, sometimes required choosing compassion over justice.